Which brings me to human rights activist and lawyer, the managing director of the Australian Christian lobby, Martyn Iles. He's been following the rise of World Health Organisation leader Tedros Adhanom, and he's dug up some very curious ties and connections. Martyn, thank you very much for your time.
G'day, Chris. Good to be here.
Good to have you on. Firstly, to the role of WHO and how they played this before and during the pandemic. Out of 10, what would you give them?
Can you go negative? It was a pretty poor show. So I think they basically did everything that China would have had them to do because they are China's friends.
And to talk about, don't close borders and all this cockamamie garbage from the leaders of World Health was just too amazing for us to believe.
Well, yeah, I mean, basically it was a litany of errors. So they had two lies, and Donald Trump pointed this out when he pulled the funding. He said, firstly, they said that there was no human-to-human transmission with this virus, or at least it wasn't significant, and they were saying that as late as January the 22nd, even though they must have known even in December. In fact, China knew in December that there was human-to-human transmission, and doctors had told them so. They said again, don't enforce travel bans, don't enforce any trade restrictions, and you rightly say it was because it would create, what they call stigma. And so instead of create stigma, you lie and people die. Yeah. And they were saying that sort of late February, that we shouldn't impose those restrictions. And of course, by that stage, the virus had spread around the world. The other thing that this Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus said was that China was a model manager of this virus, and he said that they had been transparent. And that's just incredible to me because there were doctors at the Wuhan General Hospital who were blowing the whistle on this in mid-December. On the 16th of December, Dr. Ai Fen diagnosed a patient with a novel coronavirus, tried to warn her colleagues, and she was sanctioned by the hospital authorities. She went public just a number of weeks ago and said that she and 8 of her colleagues who were dubbed rabble-rousers by the Chinese authorities tried to warn the world and were stopped. And she has disappeared. Nobody knows where she's gone. And that's just the way the Chinese Communist Party works. And when I saw that, I just thought actually of the work that I've done to look into Chinese religious minorities and Christians, and they have the same thing. That wasn't coronavirus that started their problems. They were disappearing in the night with their pastors and leaders well before this. And so,
okay, let's rewind the tape. Let's rewind the tape. Tell me about Tedros. Who backed him to get into the powerful positions he was in prior to WHO in Ethiopia?
Well, Tedros, he was a government minister in Ethiopia. He was a minister for health and foreign affairs minister. He is a very, very senior member of the Tigray People's Liberation Front. This is a Marxist, liberationist, radical party. They have links to they had links to the former Soviet Union. They were listed as a terror organisation by the UN the United States for a long time. They continue to be listed as a perpetuator of terrorism by a number of NGOs. When he was in power, they covered up cholera outbreaks in Ethiopia. He actually, when he became WHO Director General, he wanted to have Robert Mugabe recognised as a goodwill ambassador of the WHO.
Oh, you're kidding. He's a Mugabe lover.
Dictator of Zimbabwe. Absolutely. That was in 2017, so quite recent. And this is a guy who used to, be part of a government that exiled political dissidents and journalists who were not a part of, who were against the government. They'd send them to Yemen. And this is the kind of bloke that he is.
So just before you move from that kind of behaviour tells me that there are sort of communist seeds in there somewhere. What connection did he have with the Communist Party or China, for that matter, as he started his way moving up through WHO?
Well, the Tigray People's Liberation Front is a Marxist ideological party, but also he was China's pick for the role that he's in now. And they pushed and lobbied very hard for him to get in. And I'm not sure exactly why or how they got their pick, but they certainly managed to pull it off. And I think we've seen proof of that in the way that he's been in lockstep with them, not prepared to criticise them, and has been sort of their talking head on this coronavirus pandemic, right up until, I think, today, when Trump did a number on him and pulled the money. Yeah,
didn't he? What? I'd love to see other world leaders have the same guts as Trump and do the same thing in the next 24 hours. We will see. One final thing. The sadness about all of this is the fact that there was so much respect for the World Health Organisation, despite our doubt about the strings being pulled by the United Nations. You know, they collate such mammoth medical information, health information that is so valuable for bordering countries when they're trying to avoid pandemics, etc. It is such a pity to see it on its knees the way it is now.
I think that's absolutely true. And one of my real concerns in all of this is seeing the long arm of communism starting to influence more and more institutions. Internationally, the WHO, I think they're starting to get their way, and the UN and other multinational groups more and more. And I think later on in the program, you're even going to be talking about how they might be influencing our universities. So they're everywhere. And these are people who do not love freedom. These are people who are opposed to truth. And in fact, you know, they lie, and people die when they lie. And I do think that freedom-loving nations like the United States, and I think Australia needs to join hands as well, need to do something to roll this back. And if that means sending a strong statement, if that means taking strong action now so that they backtrack and so that there's reform, and yes, maybe even Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus will lose his role. I think that would be an excellent thing to do. I think that kind of pressure needs to be brought to bear upon them ASAP, because I believe communism's an evil regime, but it is certainly one that's built on lies.
Yeah, I'd concur with that. Martyn Iles, thank you so much for your time this evening.
Thank you, Chris.